There's been this push to have more, for example, women fund managers, right? Women MVCs. I remember reading that one that has not resulted in a significant amount of more capital flowing to women-founded companies. Right. And two, there's a real roadblock that exists. So even if a founder is capitalized at the early stages, they're hitting a roadblock when they need that capital to grow. And other investors aren't coming in at C+ stage, Series A stage, which we know is needed in the venture capital space, right? We need room to fail and grow.
Welcome, my Latinas! Woohoo! Welcome to the Latina Luncheon. You probably saw me being very protective of the food coming in, but I'm Monica. I work at Inicio Ventures alongside Elvia. And tomorrow is International Women's Day, so we thought what better way to celebrate than bringing all our Latinas together here and having an intimate lunch with each other and really talking about what's happening in our world. We have Leanne here who's going to do a live podcast recording of Moneda Moves. There is certainly an obligation to celebrate our successes and our achievements, but there's also an obligation to empower one another, and particularly for all our men that are in earshot of these speakers here. We look to you, right? We look to you to open doors. We look to you to create opportunities so that women can advance in the different industries and professions and companies that we represent. So again, thank you all for being here. We're really excited for what's coming next. Do you want to go ahead and introduce?
Yeah, and without further ado, the Moneda Moves podcast.
You're listening to Moneda Moves, a podcast where we cover the intersection of money and cultura. I'm your host, Leanne Alfaro, a Latina award-winning journalist, producer, and strategist. On this podcast, I highlight Latinos who are building in the world of business, our relationships with money, and contributions to the American economy. Here we will increase transparency around our dinero issues and achievements of our community, as well as our POC peers, to inspire you to pursue your financial poder. Join me weekly during this season as we cover stories with our communities front and center alongside entrepreneurs and innovators. No te lo quieres perder.
Hola, everyone. I'm going to be the moderator for your podcast today. My name is Leanne Alfaro. I am founder and host of the podcast Moneda Moves. We cover entrepreneurial Latinos and money on our way to building generational wealth. And this is a topic that is more than ever now important to discuss during these changing times, during a time where Latinos hold the 5th largest GDP and where Latinas drive a lot of this business creation. So I am so excited to be surrounded by these powerful women today on the heels of International Women's Day. So on that note, my first time in Austin. It is lovely out here. Love being out here. All you Austinites, congratulations. But joining me today on this panel is to my right here, Jessica Salinas, co-president of New Rising Ventures and New Media Ventures. You're based out of Los Angeles. Thank you for joining us. And to my direct left, Anita Roman, co-founder and CEO of Amplify Latinx out in Boston, a powerhouse of a space to be building a startup, an ecosystem. And also Maria Jose Palacio, founder and CEO of Progeny Coffee, and some delicious coffee that I can't wait to try myself in the back out there. Yes, thank you. A round of applause for all these ladies. Gracias. So today we're going to be exploring the power of Latino startup hubs. And if you did not know, I would love to highlight that Inicio launched a startup hub report just late last year that we're going to dive into a little bit. It highlights 18 key hubs. These 18 key hubs across the U.S. underscore the potential and the challenges, like the persistent funding gap that exists in our community, but also a lot of hope, a lot of work that is happening on the ground. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that today here. So let's dive right into it. Maria, we're going to start with you, founder of Progeny Coffee. And I know that it's been a long journey here. I was listening to a podcast of yours this morning where you talked about your initial dream being around fashion designing, and you had an entire career working with some of the greats out in New York City. But at the end of the day, you landed back in your family business of coffee making. And from Coffee Access in Colombia, which I just had the pleasure to visit, I would love to hear a little bit more, not just about your journey to where you are today, but also how being in a place like San Francisco in such a competitive coffee market, how that has helped you to catapult your business.
Sure. Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me in this incredible podcast. My journey starts in Colombia. I grew up in a coffee farm, and my family has been growing coffee for generations, both my mom and my dad's side. And like you mentioned, as I was growing up, I didn't want to be at the farm because for me it meant struggle. So I wanted to do something completely different and be a fashion designer. Got to New York, got to work for great fashion companies. But there I start seeing kind of that duality where I'm buying this $5 cup of coffee, going back to my country, and then there's always the conversation, things are hard. I never grew up hearing things are easy or we are in a good place. It was just this constant narrative, things are hard, things are hard. So for me, it's like, why would I even stay here? But there's where I found, with my co-founder, John, we found an opportunity. I always say that, through challenges, we always find opportunities. And then we're questioning ourselves, how can we actually fix this? It cannot be that my whole community is gonna it keeps falling into a poverty loop. And so that's how we kind of started in 2016, Progeny Coffee. And to your other question, like how we have leveraged the Silicon Valley. So actually we started very small. We started selling coffee to housewives in Silicon Valley. I remember Yes, I remember I got my hands into the first coffee. We had this big idea. It took us 4 years to actually start Progeny. It's a longer story. But the moment I got the coffee, I was like, oh my gosh, now I need to sell it. But I had a 3-month-old baby. I was new in a city. What would I do? So my husband said, go and find a niche, and keep showing up for that niche, and eventually we'll grow. So I found that there's this group of housewives that they always meet or moms in maternity leave. They gather all in Palo Alto, Los Altos. So I started showing up every day. I will set up a table and I'll be brewing coffee. I do need to say there are moments I was like, I studied university, I came to US, and now I'm like selling coffee at a park. But then it hit me. What if we knock the doors to these big companies? And what if through our story and being unique to being coffee farmers, what if that is compelling to them? And that's how we kind of leverage that ecosystem of tech companies to be able to scale our company.
First of all, I love that story. I love that the origin story of your first target audience was a group of women. Like, women power and women putting the dollar behind what they like, what they believe in has always been a super interesting thing to study. But going from directly marketing to consumers to then going B2B, now we were talking and you're working with the likes of big tech companies in Silicon Valley where your coffee is a benefit that tech employees can find in their micro kitchen and even get discounts at your coffee shop. Can you talk to us about how you said you knocked on doors of big business. How did that come to fruition and how did you establish those relationships?
Yeah, so we literally made the jump from parks to serving the tech companies. But it took a moment of getting ready. So I knew it was a highly competitive market. So, the world doesn't need another coffee company, but they do need an impact company. And so we analyzed what the companies needed and what they were looking for. So we made sure with our story, our access of being coffee farmers and being Latinas, that will speak through. And so we decided that our packaging was going to have, our patterns, our Colombian patterns. It's going to be all about the farmer. It wouldn't be about the roaster. And so with that, we created Adopt the Farmer. So because we are farmers, you could adopt our own from our communities. So instead of you buying just a coffee for, let's say, Meta or Google or so-and-so, you actually get to partner with a farmer, lift them out of poverty, transform the soils, transform their farms. So it's actually you're multiplying that investment. And so we made sure we were able to offer something that no one else could offer, because most of the companies were founded by people from the United States that didn't have access or didn't understood the origin story.
Yeah, so you had the expertise coming straight from Colombia, from a family of farmers, and it's really funny how life can be very serendipitous, very circular in that way. And so I'm so glad that you've been able to establish those B2B connections, and excited to visit your new coffee shop, which just launched earlier this year. Is that right?
Yes.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, Eneida, I want to talk a little bit more to you as well, because you're not only co-founder and CEO of Amplify Latinx, but you have a wealth of experience before that. You're a lawyer, you're an organizational psychologist, and so you know a lot about how businesses move, and analyzing that behavior and saying like, okay, I see how you move, I like how you move, maybe we should have a partnership together. And so as somebody who has, through your organization, served more than 1,000 businesses, but also worked on advancing economic prosperity and civic engagement within the Latino community, what do you think it takes to build these collaborations across these startup hubs, right? Like, I'm in Chicago, you're in Boston, we have representation from San Francisco and LA here. What does it take to make that jump across ecosystems and make those connections?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Leanne. I'm delighted to be here. So yes, let me tell you, it's not easy, right? Because you have to navigate so many different spaces when you are building, right? But the most important thing, the most important takeaway is to demonstrate how we add value. And part of our tagline at Amplify is that we ask people to invest where the growth is, right? And Monica alluded to that a few minutes ago when she said that we're the fastest growing demographic, we're the fastest growing segment of business owners. And so when you bring together people from the community, right? Because you want to have support from your community. When you bring together government leaders and other business leaders that care about economic development, then we can have a conversation, right? And so the important thing for us is to understand what needs our partners have, our stakeholders, so we can then speak their language and let them know how our work will add value to their goals and to the economy at large. So again, it's not easy, but it's a matter of learning how to navigate the different spaces that we have to work with, work in rather, so that we can advance the mission that we have, which is to make sure that Latino founders and Latino entrepreneurs have a fair chance at being, living the American dream, right? And providing their families a better future than they maybe had.
Yeah, and I mean, you tackle so much beyond what meets the eye. It's not just tackling the Latino community. I've heard you talk about how important childcare is, especially when it comes to women entrepreneurs at large. Upskilling our entrepreneurs. There's so many entrepreneurs out there that maybe don't self-identify as full-blown like startup founders, right? And they have that potential. It just needs some upskilling and connection. Super important. As somebody who studies the behavioral part of it all, I want to double click into that. What are some tells when you're collaborating with a diverse ecosystem of people across government, private? What are some tells that you and this other organization or entity are aligned?
It's an excellent question. So I would say the most important thing is to observe not what people say, but what people do. Because I can say that I believe in this, believe in that, believe in a million things, but if my team, my actions don't reflect what I'm saying that is important to me, then that is then a different conversation that we need to have about how we want to make sure that we are collaborating and meeting the goals that we have to advance the common goals. Because again, at the end of the day, we look for commonality with all the stakeholders that we work with. And generally speaking, people care about economic development, they care about safety, they care about health. So there's a lot of underlying common themes and common interests that then we focus on so that we can advance. And speaking of childcare, right? So childcare is a national crisis. Like, this is not something that is exclusive to Massachusetts. Like, we don't have enough high quality childcare. We know that childcare rests in the hands of mostly women of color, right? And so then we said, you know what? We have a group of childcare providers in Massachusetts who don't necessarily have the tools and and they have the skills, but they don't have the tools to scale and grow their business, because some of them are home-based and maybe they want to buy a building so they can become a center-based, right? Or they're just getting started and they see themselves as babysitters. They don't see themselves as actual educators and childcare providers and business owners. And so our team of advisors, of business advisors, works with them to help them understand how to run a business efficiently, profitably, and if they want to grow and scale, that we connect them with the with the resources, right, and with the tools, and it's made a huge difference. And so business owners care about that, right? Because if you have a mom who's in maternity leave, but she can't find high quality childcare, it's going to be harder for her to go back to work, right? But if you have more slots, you have childcare providers who are able to promote their business, right, through these advisors that help them grow and scale and focus on whatever need they have, then moms are going to find them, right, and then they're going to be able to have more slots, and then employers are happy, right, and the economy grows because the kids have high quality education, parents can go back to work, everybody makes money, and everybody's happy, right? In theory. But, that's essentially the gist behind that particular vertical of our business program. But, of course, we work with many other businesses. But given the crisis that we have, it's a great model that is really serving very fruitful right now.
Incredible, Anita. I'm going to have to come back to you so we can dive back into that experience. But Jessica, you also have a lot of experience, in particular when it comes to venture capital and working across different types of ecosystem buildings. Right now, leading investments at New Rising Ventures, to your work as partner at an impact fund, tackling even global challenges. So I'd love to tap your expertise a little bit further. What can we do as startup hubs? There were 18 different hubs in the report, but how can different hubs really rise up on the list and really stand out to investors, right? We see it when we talk about investing, we see a lot of attention drawn to the coast, right? A lot of it coming from Silicon Valley, New York. And even in Chicago, we see that too. We see talent leaving the Midwest. There's so much good talent in the Midwest. Why are people leaving capital, right? So, but we would like to keep that. We would like to keep the richness of those hubs. How can we better drive the hubs to be more present on a national level?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've had the pleasure of being at the forefront of building a few ecosystems that I think I lean on for this question. I was fortunate enough to be on the founding team of the Latino Business Action Network and Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiatives scaling program. I think some of the team is
They're
still
here in the audience.
Yeah,
I think I saw them.
Jen just spoke. And I was the founding director of that, and we had a goal of scaling businesses, and that was brick and mortar and tech, and I'm sure you'll hear more about their current work there. But I also was behind the designing of a Fortune 5 impact accelerator for Black, Latino, and Indigenous suppliers and sustainability under their racial justice initiative a few years ago. And the goal there was to get Black, Latino, and Indigenous suppliers through procurement processes, because we know that that's where a lot of the capital for suppliers and startups is. And so there was a big gap that existed there, and we were set out to address that gap. And last year at New Rising Ventures, we launched an accelerator for Latino-led news media orgs in the South and Southwest. So a lot of these overlooked states that are critical to power building and social power building in the United States, as we saw in the election. And so we targeted 6 key states, and our goal there was to get them to scale their audiences. So we didn't want to influence their messaging, but we know that they are trusted messengers in their communities, and if we want them to continue being that, we need to help them scale their audience and give them the tools to do that. And I think what I've learned from being part of these hubs regionally, nationally, et cetera, is that there's a lot to learn from social movements, in that the best social movements have progressed because of strategic coordination, right? And so that's the
So
same
a lot of grassroots building, right?
So
like
much
you're so
grassroots
close
building.
to the ground. You're not talking at it from out here on the coast. You're actually there.
Yes, and that every region is different. And I think that's what I love about the Latino Startup Hub initiative from Inicio Ventures, is that they're really taking a human-centered approach and a design thinking approach to these hubs. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, right? And that's what we learned across these startup hubs. Each industry needed different sets of tools and different types of support. And so taking that approach across those cities is imperative, because Chicago might have very different needs than LA. But if we want to create a movement across these hubs, I think we can, again, lean on these movements in that there is a cross-industry concerted effort with like shared goals, right? And every successful social movement has a collaboration and a coordination across not just organizers, activists, funders, policymakers, media, and so many other players, right? But they all know their shared goal, and they all know their roles within that vision that they have. And so I think that's what's needed in the Latino startup hub movement, if we're calling it a movement. And I think it's also important that it's not a one and done. What I've seen is that even in the VC ecosystem, even as there's been this push to have more, for example, women fund managers, right, women in VCs, I remember reading that one that has not resulted in a significant amount of more capital flowing to women-founded companies.
Right.
And two, there's a real roadblock that exists. So even if a founder is capitalized at the early stages, they're hitting a roadblock when they need that capital to grow. And other investors aren't coming in at C+ stage, Series A stage, which we know is needed in the venture capital space, right? We need room to fail and grow. If you take Uber, for example, Uber was not profitable until
for a while.
Yeah, right. When they IPO'd, they still weren't profitable, and that's why they got a lot of backlash. But the reason that they were successful is because these investors continued injecting capital across every stage, because their futures are linked, right? The success of Uber is interlinked with the success of the fund, etc. And so it was in their best interest to do that. And so when we look at ecosystems, making sure, and these hubs, making sure that it's not a one and done. So it's not, we're only supporting you at the early stage. How are we really making sure that across stages we're there?
It's an ongoing relationship is what it sounds like. And so you've been in a lot of positions where you're nationally looking at the space and saying, okay, here's who we want to work with, here's who we think has a lot of potential for growth and is a sound investment. How do you identify those leads? Especially when you talk about like all of the functions of a movement, right? It's like media, it's startups, it's activists, it's government. How do you identify these leads? What are the things that will stand out to you?
Yeah, for us, when we're looking at investments, we're at early stage investors. So what we're really looking at is the team, right? That's the most important thing for us. The team, and I guess a unique perspective on the field. And so we invest in media, civic technology, as well as in entrepreneurs who are filling gaps that government is leaving behind, which is many right now. But what we want to know is that they understand their market, and that they know how to message it. So narrative storytelling is key and critical, especially in this day and age. And that they're resilient, right? Most startups are going to pivot, like you did, right? Most startups are going to pivot, but do we believe in the founding team enough that they have the expertise, the skills, et cetera, to still achieve that theory of change or that impact or that vision that they set out to do? And so that's what we're really looking for at those early stages.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a lot of team, flexibility, adaptability, right? So you can move with the changing times. And you mentioned funding, super important topic, also one highlighted in the report. Also, I'm sure not a new figure to so many of us that there is this 2% funding gap when it comes to talking about in investing and funding Latino entrepreneurs. So especially right now in these evolving times, changing times, let's talk a little bit about where that responsibility falls, but closing that funding gap, right? Because we always talk about solutions, but where does the responsibility right now fall in terms of closing that funding gap, and how do we tackle to build and elevate together? That's an open question.
Yeah, I think one thing that I noticed, and it's interesting what you just said, we raise a seed round, and then to get into a Series A, you do feel a much bigger gap where you get early funding. And it's interesting what you said, that in so many cases they do allow them to fail, but how they measure us is like you need to be always succeeding. Like if you fail, it's much more less forgiving that our counterparts. And I've seen it over and over again where they get much easier funding. But I did notice also that there are some that are rising up, like we're sitting here with Inicio Ventures. There's other ones that have risen up to the challenge. But I do think that in these conversations and as we build the ecosystem, and I know with like LBAN, they have opened so many of the doors. They have paved the way. So then you do have room to sit at the table. You do have access. You create these spaces where it's much easier to connect with investors, where before it was just much harder. I remember I was cohort 6, and yet that ecosystem of LBAN was not fully built. And so it seemed much less reachable for you to be able to have those conversations.
Yeah. And I'll just weigh in really quickly on that. Like the fact that I have a background in journalism. I was at CNBC Business Insider before doing what I do today. And that reporting is absolutely invaluable. Like to be able to reference those statistics. I know the Seoul Summit's coming up next month. Who's going to be there? Hope to see you there.
Yeah.
With that report released by Latino Business Action Network every year, it gives us important stats that allows us to point to data and make data-driven decisions and data-driven reporting. So even as a journalist, I have seen the trajectory of that change. Having more data, more research enables us to make more sophisticated thesis statements for, hey, this is why we need attention in this startup hub or this particular demographic.
No, that's an excellent point. And in fact, at Amplify, that's what we do. We commission research, and then we leverage that data to advance the policy solutions that will close opportunity gaps, both in economic development and leadership, right? And I think there's so much power in storytelling. You said it, like we do that all the time. It's about narratives. It's about shifting mindsets. It's about making sure that we're elevating the narrative and taking control of it, right? Because we are a force in this country, economic. But there's a difference between our purchasing power, which is like the 5th largest economy in the world, versus wealth creation, right? Because the wealth creation is not always there. And so we need to make sure that we are sharing the potential and success stories, right? So that we can then continue opening doors for people like you, for founders like you. And while it's wonderful to have our own networks like Inicio, LBAN, and others, we have to go outside of our own networks, right? Because there's a lot of people with a lot of deep pockets outside of our own networks that can get it if we shape the proper narrative, if we tell the stories the way they the impact of the work. And if we talk about the solutions that we're trying to solve, the problems we're trying to solve, through a lens that people can understand, because sometimes it's hard, right? If you don't have the lived experiences, you don't necessarily understand what some people are trying to solve. But if you then help and understand, okay, maybe you don't get this, but let's see, how we can help you understand what we're trying to solve. And by the way, the problem we're trying to solve is going to be marketable to a huge segment of the population, right? So you're going to get your money's worth, right? And so, in Boston, we're very lucky. We have a very supportive community, stakeholders for, our counterparts in the white community, the black community, and, Asian, and, everybody, gets it for the most part. And it's just, again, about making sure that we're sharing the impact of the work, what we're trying to accomplish, and how that is going to benefit the economy at large at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think on the question on whose responsibility is it, I think it's all of our responsibility. It's a collective effort. It's an intersectional effort. And I spend a lot of time thinking about how we can get creative on how we're viewed in this country, but also how we say F it, to how we're viewed in this country, right? And so how are we almost force functioning the wins, right? How are we thinking creatively or radically around how we can create our own wins and not wait until our counterparts recognize our value, right? It's been a long waiting game.
Right now, it's going to be the time to build that. That's for sure.
You know, and so I spent a lot of time thinking about that. You know, I think we've done the State of Latino Entrepreneurship report for going on 10 years. And, you know, the data shows that, you know, we've been kind of screaming this from the rooftops for years before that report came out. And it hasn't really shifted that much. So how long are we waiting for others to recognize our value, right? And how are we essentially radically creating our value and being like, here are our own systems and our own, and you know, that's what I hope we can accomplish with this initiative with the Latino hubs. And maybe working together with you know, the Black community or the Indigenous community, et cetera. We're in this together.
Yeah, it's such a huge opportunity there.
Yeah.
Some cross collaboration, not staying in our silo, talking to other groups. Now, on that note of thinking creatively, I think that that's something that we're gonna take and carry into this current space that we're in. Maria, I want to ask you as a founder about non-traditional ways that you fundraised for your company, right? Like, we often talk about venture capital, angel investing. What are some unconventional resources that you've gone to fundraise?
Yeah, so through my journey, and so I'll tell you a little bit story. Remember, like I mentioned, I went from, you know, starting at Parks to getting a large first corporate account. And I remember I got this first account. It was you know, one of the top tech companies in Silicon Valley, well known, like everybody knows it. And we got these, you know, $1 million contract. And I remember holding that contract with my hands. And now getting to realization, I need capital. Because like I need to scale. I need to scale production team. I need to bring containers of coffee. Like the dream what we were looking for, of lifting farmers out of poverty, bringing them education, transforming their farms. Like we were reaching there. We had it. And we had this incredible partner. And so I was like, well, that must be easy. I'm just gonna go to, you know, the local bankers down the street. I went with the contract. Like it's obvious, like I could pay back because I have these well-known. And I remember everybody, you know, said no. Every single, you know, institutions said no. And then there, like at the, you know, 8th hour, like at the end, about to lose, someone recommended me to go and knock the doors to some CDFIs. I didn't know they existed. And then I found this incredible ecosystem of CDFIs in the Bay Area. And I know there are around the country. In my area, they're called, you know, there's one ICA, Working Solutions, Pacific Community Ventures. And I remember, like, their motto is their first check. And so they were the ones that actually has been funding me still today. They are the ones that give me all the capital that I need to keep scaling, and every account and everything that new corporate account, those are the ones that keep you know, coming to us with free resources, with introductions, with restructuring, pro bono legal advice, and like just anything, any resources. And then they create an ecosystem as well of founders, and now we could share our wins, or we could share our knowledge, or we could introduce each other. So now that I am at the, you know, all these companies now, I also bring in other companies, you know, other founders with me, because alongside with coffee, there's cookies, there's, you know, chai, there's like so many other products that goes along with, and so now we are opening those doors. But yeah, you know, when there was thank you. When it was just really hopeless, I realized that an ecosystem does exist.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. That's amazing that you have like alternative resources, and of course you've done work with Inicio. You've had backing from Latitude. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
How that came to be?
Yeah. So I remember we're like, okay, we're gonna go and raise money, but understanding that, you know, the stats, less than 2%, and Latino we're less. It's kind of daunting to start a journey when you just know like your percentage is like it's not even there that you're gonna get investment. But someone told me, make a list of 100 investors. When you have 50 no's, you're closer to your yes. So it become that journey that every no is closer to my yes. But in that journey, I did learn that I needed to know the language of investors. I needed to have my deck. I just, like any other industry, like you were saying, I need to know my storytelling, who is my audience, right? Like I'm also selling a piece of my company. So it was a journey. But what it was beautiful also with, for example, with Latitude, it was the first one that came in. I remember there's Laura. I don't know if some of you know Laura. My background was in fashion. And so when I would come and I would mention fashion, people would be like, oh, what's that? Like, were you in the store? Like, they wouldn't get what was important. And back then, I was managing the overseas production for, let's say, Marc Jacobs or Alexander Wang. And so that's multiple factories nationwide. Multiple, if you think about a garment, you have zippers, you have buttons, you have threads, multiple colors. And that's a big production and supply chain that you need to manage. And I remember like I was not getting through the message. And then, you have a woman in the table who understands the complexity of fashion because, and then she's like, no, I get her. And I know that her skill will get her far. Like, I know that she has what it takes to manage this because her company is a supply chain company. She already did it in fashion. But I remember thinking to myself, if it wasn't that she knew, like there was a connection that sometimes, like it says, like sometimes women don't get funded because, our male counterparts, they might not be, there won't be that affinity to our topics, right? So that was beautiful. And then with Inicio Ventures, we connected, and they just fell in love on the story, which was really beautiful because they really went through what was our story, our impact, the impact with the farmers, and they will care more of that, everything that we're doing at the source. Yes, the revenue will come, but they understood that with that impact, the revenue was gonna come.
Thank you for the insight and all of those stories, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the journey. Now, I know that we're in a very fast changing ecosystem and landscape. We're seeing shifts in language, business structure, expansion strategies, whether we talk about topics of inclusion, topics about the future of the VC model, and explore new markets. So I'd be very curious to hear from each of you, how can founders and ecosystem builders then remain both adaptable and impactful during this time? It's a behemoth of a question to tackle. There's like new reports every week on like language and the importance of storytelling and how we storytell, but what shifts are you noticing, and what advice might you have to anyone here leading an ecosystem or a company?
I think that's directed at me, right?
We're going to start with you, Anita. The behavioral aspect, for sure.
Well, let me tell you, speaking of Latitude, right? They say that we are the new mainstream economy, right? And that is something that we haven't yet mastered to bring to mainstream media, communications, et cetera, right? I mean, obviously, this is like an onion. There's so many layers. I mean, part of the issue is that there are not enough decision makers at the highest levels to push certain stories and narratives. But at the end of the day, again, Latinos, we're incredibly resilient. From coming from Latin America to here, and I think that we have to really embrace that grit that's so symbolic of who we are as a culture, as a people, and just figure out. Listen, at the end of the day, it goes back to messaging. Figuring out how we can explain the value, right? And just take control of the narrative. I can't say this enough times, right? Like just making sure, and I get it, like it's been super slow. I mean, since the 80s, people are talking about this demographic shift, but to your point, I think that it was not evident until now. And I think now so much more people are understanding. You're always going to have people that don't understand or don't want to understand, right? But by talking about the impact and the value of what we bring to the table, and by talking about the economic imperative that it is to ensure that Latinos have a seat at the table, because those will not just be your workers, they're going to be your customers, right? And so it's about helping folks understand that it's not just the Latinos who are here now, our age, but also the ones that are coming behind us, because Latinos, we're a very young community, right? And so
average age of 31. But yeah, we have the entire Gen Z and
Correct.
And so fourth community behind us.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if it's important today, it's going to be even more important tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and so on and so forth, right? Just creating awareness, right? And understanding also where these biases are coming from and just kind of tackle them in a gentle way, not by being offensive to anybody, but by trying to understand what the root of the barriers are to try to overcome them. And I agree with you, like that's why we're here. Like we build these ecosystems to make sure that we're championing each other and supporting each other, but that's not enough. We need allies. We need people who are outside of our community that understand the importance of investment. And by the way, you said when you were talking about your investors and how you've come to meet them, it's also really powerful to come to be in community here, because when we were talking earlier, I shared with you this other CDFI that is in Boston. It's national, but it's Boston based. I'm like, I'm gonna connect you, right? Because again, there's so much power in this community, and I love coming to this. I go back to Boston energized, right? Because we're just sharing best practices, talking about how we're gonna, discuss what we're doing, and hopefully continuing to move the needle for the community that we care, and that is so important to the growth and sustainability, economic sustainability of this nation.
Yeah, big on sharing best practices, because unfortunately, there's been a lot of businesses in our community that have started to be targeted, or bigger businesses that have funds for Latinos. I mean, that's just a fact. That's just stating the fact. So I'd love to hear from you, Jessica. How do you see founders and ecosystems repositioning during this time?
Yes, and I just want to say that I think the through line of what you and I are saying is collectivity, right? Which goes back to, I think, our roots, our Latino roots around community and collectivity and the yes and of it all, right? Like, yes, we need data and we need, and I am with you on that. And I think for me with founders, the conversations we're having now is around how to, and with ecosystem builders, is around how we're staying ahead, right? How we're being proactive, while understanding that there is some reaction needed to certain policies and setbacks that we might have because of current executive orders, et cetera, and how that's affecting business. And so we spend a lot of time right now with our founders thinking around how they can build market resilience. And that might be getting creative with their business models, getting creative with their language, which I know we spent some time talking about, getting creative with how they're like pivoting their customers or their markets, et cetera, to like protect themselves, but also just get ahead. And personally, I'm spending a lot of time thinking through how even the venture capital model can be redesigned and redefined to be disrupted, because I think it's about time that it's disrupted. And so how can we work with nonprofits, with other DAFs, et cetera, to reposition and restructure how venture models operate and how they support entrepreneurs. And so I think it's about like staying ahead right now, and that's what we're working with our founders on.
Thank you. And Maria, how are you reconsidering the storytelling? You also mentioned you're looking even at international business as a possibility.
Yes. So, yeah. I mean, I'm always constantly having a pulse on like what's happening in the world, locally, nationally in the world. Also, I mean, South America versus North America, because it doesn't impact my supply chain. And this was something that I actually learned when I was working in fashion, because in fashion is luxury. So the first thing that gets impacted in purchases is luxury goods. So when there's something, you stop buying that, expensive, purse or so on. And so I'm constantly like checking what is happening and what is resonating with our clients. So one thing I do a lot is I go to meetings and I start testing, Progeny Coffee, we have different segments. So we have our impact in Colombia. Our impact in Colombia is, lifting farmers out of poverty through education, technical support. We get to pay them up to 270% above fair trade prices. But also we have our innovation farm, where we have been working for 6 years in innovative methods to make our farmers resilient to climate change and better our farming techniques. And then we have here our distribution. We're also Latinas, we're also women-owned, and so we have many places where we could pull narratives and the storytelling. And so I do go always to the clients, and I tell also our team, understand what are they feeling. I know when they're coming to certain big shifts, even COVID or whatever main shifts, people start caring for different things, or they start looking for different things, or having affinity to different things. So I'll go to a meeting, I'll test different messages from the company and see where are they. Are they more in the social, more in the sustainability? So for example, lately I noticed that they're leaning into sustainability. So then we're leaning into, well, we come and we align with your sustainable goals to be able, and that has allowed us to grow exponentially. Because now we're talking their language, even though we're still a coffee company, but we still come and we align with your sustainable goals, helping you achieve them through coffee, as well as the international market. Like, what are the markets? So I'm always trying to figure out my A, B, C, D. Okay, if the market goes down in US, what are the markets that are consuming coffee? So for example, I was telling you, the Middle East is one of the big ones, like Dubai and Saudi Arabia. So we're trying now to test those markets to make sure we are resilient to all the changes that are happening.
Yeah, and I'm hearing a lot of adaptability and flexibility there, a common through line that I see in all of you, by the way, in addition to that resilience that is so iconic to our Latino entrepreneurs. So we have arrived at the end of the podcast, and I do have a question that I always ask folks when they come on the podcast, which I'm just gonna ask you to reach deep into your memory trove and pull out what your biggest money move has been. It can be from your professional life or from your personal life. And usually we get some really interesting responses here, so I'll let y'all take it away.
I can start. Mine would be actually more recently in the past few years, and it's more of a mindset and a mentality, and it's letting go of poverty anxiety. I think, I grew up low income. I grew up in Houston, actually, so very close to here. And, with my dad being a construction worker, my mom, selling empanadas, door to door, having us out there selling food on the weekends. And I feel like I always, and still I fight with this now, but I always feel like nothing is certain. And that any day I could go back to $0, right? And so is my job secure? And I'm the
feel that hard, yeah.
Right? And so kind of letting that go and leaning more into an abundance mindset and a collective mindset with my family, and knowing that it's not about maximizing the amount of wealth that I can have in one lifetime, but it's more about redistributing and knowing that I'm in community, that I'm not alone in this, and that I have something to fall back on, which is family and community always, has really helped with that poverty anxiety.
That longer term thinking, it's really hard to wrap your head around. It's
Yes.
just like, it's multiple therapy sessions, I feel
So
like.
many.
And Neda, what about you?
No, I love that. I love your answer. And along the same lines, it's about stepping into your power, right? You alluded to this earlier, right? Understanding that we have value, that that we are professionals, and in fact, part of that is investing in my own education, because I know that there's a lot of pushback now with college being so expensive, and that's completely understandable, right? Like, it's just really expensive. But the reality is that college degrees pay off exponentially, right? Generally speaking. So, the fact that I have a double graduate degree, and I can use that to serve my community, I mean, that's just priceless, right? And focusing on the fact that I have this education, that I have this knowledge, that I can advocate, that I can push for policy solutions that close opportunity gaps for our community is incredibly rewarding. But it takes time, because when I was younger, I had certainly not stepped into my power. But as I got a little older, I'm like, you know what, I can do this, and make sure that we are getting out of mindsets that keep us back and really push us forward to do what we love to do.
Well, first of all, I completely relate to what you mentioned, because also, growing in Colombia, in an agriculture business, I remember seeing my dad through a storm, and my grandpa and my dad sitting in one end, to just knowing that, like, the storm is coming, nothing you can do, it's going to destroy it, you need to get back again. So having that anxiety. But for me, the biggest move has been betting on myself. Like, moving here, but like, can I do this? And then putting it all in it, like, to the point that is this or nothing. But it took a big move of trust, letting go mental barriers, and like, just, mental barriers that you set from how you're being raised. And I'm very grateful that that has been one of the things, betting on myself and seeing that I was able to.
I love these common through lines, and more of investing in ourselves, more of believing of something greater, not just for ourselves, but in that collectivist mindset. I think here in the U.S. in particular, I feel that shift with my parents. My parents are immigrants from Mexico, and it's a lot of like, hey, y'all are really about that rugged individualism out here. I'm like, yeah, we kind of are. We kind of need to lean back into some of our roots there. So harping on some of that collectivism, which we're so going to need. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining me on this podcast episode of Moneda Moves, for sharing your experience, for sharing a little bit of your expertise as we move forward into this coming year, and on to more from Inicio here. Thanks. Bravo. And Monica, are we ready to hand off here? Do we have a room for a Q&A? I know we're right at time. Okay. 5 minutes of Q&A. So anyone have questions for any of these ladies? Maria, Eneida, Jessica? You have so much expertise. You can also catch them one-on-one right after this, but don't be shy if you have a question. Yes!
Thank you, Jefas, for being here and representing us. We love hearing each of your stories. My name is Rebecca Clyde, and I'm the CEO of Botco AI. There's a lot of AI startups here today. I'd love to hear how you're thinking about the use of AI in maybe more traditional sectors, like even coffee, and what your outlook really is for the adoption of AI, and perhaps even how Latinos in our community can help drive that forward. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
I can share very quickly that at Amplify, that's one of the core courses that we teach to all our businesses. It's the use of AI and leveraging AI and making sure that they are businesses of the 21st century. Because it's a reality. AI is here. It's here to stay. Just like Latinos are here and we're here to stay, right? I mean, that's not going anywhere. And we need to make sure that our businesses are equipped with the necessary tools to be successful using the technology that is available. And that will make their lives easier, and that will automate a lot of the stuff that takes a lot of time right now. So absolutely.
Yeah, we just ran an open call for responsible AI thanks to the support of, this is community right here, Lily and K4 Center. And we focused on nonprofit tech innovation. But we're an impact fund, so I think for us, even when we're looking at our for-profit investments or our grant investments, what we're looking at is the trade-off, right, of impact versus harm. And so that leads to a core question for us is the AI in this actually necessary? And does it outweigh the potential harm that it could have on certain communities, et cetera, and across regions, especially in the global south? AI has very detrimental harms and risks. And so we're constantly weighing those when we're making investments. And so I think one of the core questions we ask is this necessary, or is this just a feature, right? Is this just being added on because it might get you more investment, or is it truly part of what is needed to create the value of this company? And so that's something we're deeply thinking about. And two, what we found through our nonprofit tech open call is that a lot of Black and Brown founders were focusing on reactive AI. And what I mean by that is AI that is auditing or working on reducing bias, et cetera, so reacting to certain issues that already exist. And we would have liked to see more working on what we call proactive AI or systemic change AI, which is core solutions, right? And we were able to invest in a couple that were working on preservation and archiving of Black history, as well as using AI for abolition and restorative justice in ed tech. We're excited to see this. We're running the second year this year, and we're excited to see what solutions we see.
For us, as a more traditional, I think my answer is going to be very different, but I'm very excited at the farming level, because there's going to be so much automation we're going to be able, because right now in Colombia, everything is very very labor intensive. That doesn't need to be, and very heavy on the workers. And so we'll be able to be maximized, get better qualities through different things that we could create that we're already thinking about. So that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly from the last LBAN report, Latinos are adopting AI at higher rates than white-owned businesses. So that is an amazing thing. The thing that I'm curious in learning about is like, again, is that a feature or like an add-on, or is it integral to the business where it's changing it in a major way? And that's what we would hope to see, right? But thank you so much for the question. Now, I know we have a packed program, so I'm going to hand off the mic back to Monica and get the show on the road, or continued on the road. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, mi gente, for joining us this week on Moneda Moves. Before you go, please make sure to hit follow on this podcast so you can receive new episodes right when they are released. You can follow right now in the app you're using to listen to this podcast. Also, continue keeping cuentas and keeping tabs on our Latinx community and Money Moves via our free newsletter written by yours truly at monedamoves.substack.com. That's monedamoves.substack.com. I'll see you there. Hasta la próxima.